My grandmother on my mom's side was a wonderful cook, but her real love wasn't cooking. Her real love was the outside work, was caring for the livestock, raising the gardens, the edible gardens and the flower gardens. And gardens and livestock need water. And on the farmstead, she would just take 2 5-gallon pails. I forgot the pails in the office, and they weren't quite 5 gallons. 2 5-gallon pails, and she'd fill them with water. It's about 83 pounds, if you're wondering. She wouldn't actually have 83 pounds, and she'd leave about 1 inch or 2 at the top of the pail just for a little bit of slosh, so she didn't lose any. And she would go across the yard carrying this water to her garden, or to the chickens or the ducks, or wherever it needed to be carried. Now, as I grew older, I tried to carry the water too. I had just a little bit in the pails. Oh, as I grew older than that, I noticed I could lift pails full of water. It was work, but I could lift. But my strength wasn't the type of strength my grandmother had. The type of strength my grandmother had was a strength that's accumulated over years and over decades. Just a steady, quiet strength. To me, as soon as I had any pail of water in my hands and my arms, the yard was suddenly like 3 times the size it had been before. To my grandmother, it just was what it was, and she carried so smoothly, without spilling and sloshing. Reminded me of those Buddhist monks, that's we have the picture, for their training and strength, holding out the pails of water, or moving with them and trying not to spill them. It was today we baptized Elise Marie, a beautiful little girl with a beautiful name. She's surrounded by godparents and parents and family and grandparents. She's surrounded by the love of this church, which is wonderful. But she's also baptized into Jesus' baptism, which means, even though her arms are tiny, she is surrounded by this community of care that goes on for centuries, that knows the art of carrying the baptismal waters across the millennia. A couple thousand years ago, Jesus was baptized in the River Jordan. And he was part of a Jewish people that were a water-carrying people. They had their rites that were very similar to baptism. With washing, they drew near water. They organized their lives around where is the water, because they were a desert people. Water was hope. Water was quenching of thirst. Water was cleanliness. The water that we read about, this and more, is God's promise to us and to Elise Marie. And all this was God's promise to Jesus. And we were baptized into his baptism. We were baptized into those words. This is my love. I love him. He makes me happy. And we are his brothers and sisters, and we make God happy. We are adopted into the family. There will be deserts, however. There will be temptations. There will be trials. There will be times when it seems as though the devil sits on our doorsteps. This is part of life. I went on a hospital call this last week to the ICU. And as I did that, I also walked by the place where the officer and his family and his friends and his support system and their support system was. And there was heavy grief in Sanford Hospital. Heavy, heavy grief. As people were dealing with a loss that seemed unfair. And it was a desert time. And yet even in the midst of the desert time, there was the caring. It was a time when people would be tempted to think the worst of the world and to believe God was absent. Except there were all these people like my grandmother. I could see her walking with their 2 5-gallon pails, bringing life where life needed to be brought to on the farm, almost effortlessly. It wasn't effortlessly, but it looked effortless, because her muscles were conditioned to carry the water, to carry the light, to carry the love, to carry the hope, to carry the life. Officer Moser's muscles were conditioned to do the same, it seems. He went in years before into a burning home to rescue people. Not part of his training at all, just part of who he was. His colleagues were the ones who managed to keep the neighborhood safe, just as Officer Moser was doing. It could have been worse Wednesday and Thursday without their service. It could have been worse if Sanford wasn't there taking the people in. It could have been worse if we weren't, as a people, practiced in the art of caring for one another. If it wasn't steeped in our DNA to somehow carry the water to others who are thirsty. It could have been worse. And it is, however bad it is, there are still a whole people, there's a whole community seeking to raise $100,000 for Officer Moser's family. Not to take away the pain and the loss, but to just help them move into the future as best as possible and to say that there are people who care. And this day of baptism, little Elise Marie Burkhart reminds us that we are called to be water carriers for her. The people of faith and strength and encouragement as she grows until that day she begins to raise a family of her own and becomes one of the water carriers that carries on the giving and the life-giving and the giving of hope and the giving of promise and trust to others, the power of baptism. The beauty of being a water carrier, the beauty of being people who live into our baptism is that the practicing of our faith makes us stronger through God's grace. The deserts can make us stronger. There are days I'll remember something that my grandmother said or did, and it will be a word of encouragement to my soul. It just makes me feel good. There are days I open the Bible, and when I read it, something Jesus said or did just encourages my soul and makes me feel good and reminds me of what life is about. We are baptized into that faith that is meant to be encouragement in the deserts. Cling to the water. Each of you, as you leave today, will be given by the ushers a water bottle with water in it. It is your item to carry into the Lenten desert. You can decorate it. You can drink it if you're thirsty right now. You can set it in the middle of your table, carry it in your car, anything to remind you that you have been baptized and that God goes with you through every temptation and every desert circumstance, and that God goes with you through Lent. Or maybe you run across someone who just seems to be struggling. Pass the gift on and just tell them, I've been holding on to this through Lent to remind me I'm baptized and God loves me. I just want to remind you, God loves you too. Carry the water. Remember your baptism. Remember you are brothers and sisters of Christ, now and